Okay, so thank you all for joining us this evening. This workshop, as you know, is part of the Keep Calm and Finish Strong workshop series. So we'll introduce ourselves and then we'll jump into it. My name is Jason Pratt. My title here is Reading and Writing Specialist. I work in the Academic Success Center. So if you ever need help with papers, citations, research, any of that kind of stuff, I'm happy to help. You can reach me. My email is jpratt@niagara.edu. I'll put that at the end of the workshop as well, but I'm always here to help if you need help in the Writing Center, or you can just, once we're in person again, you can always just stop by the ASC. So let Melissa introduce herself and then we can start.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. That is a fancy title, and I cannot believe, Professor Pratt, that you put that whole thing down. But basically what that means is that I do a lot of the library instruction. That's what user education is, just to help you find the best information quickly and efficiently in order to be successful in your assignments that have research in them. And I attend a lot of meetings. That's what that title means.
And it's not easy to fit on one line either, by the way.
I can't believe it's all there.
Okay, so we're very glad that you all joined us tonight to talk a little bit about APA and demystifying APA. One of the things you're going to find out when you start working with it is that there are a lot, it seems overwhelming at first with all the kind of practicalities and requirements, but that can also be sort of comforting when you're writing a paper because in a sense, once you know the format, you're kind of just filling in the blanks, if that makes sense. Not necessarily in writing the paper itself, but in terms of the title page, in terms of the citations. It's a very strict kind of structure, which can also be very helpful when you're writing, because then you know if you're sort of following that structure that you're on the right track in terms of these things. So it can be, it can also be nice to have as a writer. So part one of the workshop is APA basics. What makes APA different from MLA or Chicago, or, you know, if you go into the databases, there's dozens of citation styles. So what makes APA APA? First of all, APA stands for American Psychological Association. And not surprisingly, it's used in the social sciences like psychology, sociology, business. If you're an education major, you'll use APA quite a bit. Also, certain health fields use it. Nursing, for example, often uses APA. And really what APA is for discussing and disseminating and publishing research. So it cares about things like the author's name, obviously, but also the year. Year is an important part of it. You know, if you think about MLA, if you're familiar with MLA at all, let's say you're writing a paper on a Shakespeare play. You're writing on Hamlet or something like that. Well, Hamlet hasn't changed a whole lot in a few hundred years, right? 300-400 years, give or take. And so it's less important the year. In APA, if you're talking about something in psychology, well, 10, 20 years makes a big difference. So that's why we care about the year so much in APA, one of the many reasons. The other thing is it shows that your research and scholarship is current. So in a sense, it's really hard to hide that in APA. If you're saying Smith 1974 writes, you know, it's going to stick out, obviously. So APA is really concerned with the author's name, the year. Both of those elements are a big part of citations in APA style. And the big thing that I hope you take away, one of the big takeaways is that APA implies a scholarly conversation. You're adding to the work of others. That's always true in any research, but especially true in APA, where essentially what you're doing is you're saying, okay, here are the foundational pieces, here are my research components, and then you're adding the next layer to that. Some sort of analysis. In a sense, you're writing a secondary source, as we're going to talk about in a minute. I like analogies. I'm a visual learner. If you've ever done something with learning styles, kinesthetic and visual tend to be the ones that I gravitate to personally. And so I like things that I can picture or sort of imagine building in this case. So I like to think about an APA paper as like building a house. So the foundation, these bricks, those are your sources. Those are your pieces of research. Those might be database articles. They might be historical documents. They might be pictures. They might be silent films, whatever you're studying. Those are the primary sources. And those are kind of the foundation of your house. The actual house is your paper. That's your argument. What are you adding? That's the thing you always want to remember or think about. What is it that you're adding that the authors aren't saying? Because after all, if it's just, you know, Smith says this, Thomas says this, Davis says this, well, I could just go read those. Why are they together in your paper? And what are you going to add to the conversation on top of what they've said? That's kind of the thought process you always want to have. And we'll talk about that in more detail later. But just for now, we'll put that on the table that anytime you're writing an APA paper, it's always, okay, the sources say this, but how can I take it to the next level? Similarly, if you're writing an annotated bibliography, which is a very common type of assignment in APA, in a class that uses APA, or it may be a step in the process of a longer research paper, even in an annotated bib, we're not simply reciting the work of others. We're always taking that a step forward in some way. And we're going to talk about that as well in the workshop today. I mentioned primary sources a second ago. APA prefers primary sources in terms of citations. So when you're doing your research, a primary source is somebody's findings, someone writing about his or her, or it's usually a group in APA, as you'll see, a group's research. They've done the research and now they're publishing the research in a scholarly journal. So the way that might look is, let's say you're a part of a research team, you do a bunch of research on a psychology topic, you collect your data over a long period of time, you kind of write up a provisional article, like the findings, then you send it to other researchers who are peers in your field, they peer review it, and this process might take a year, 2 years, it takes a long time. Once it passes the peer review, you know, because sometimes peers will say, hey, you know, there's an issue with your research. And then you go back and you have to sort of adjust what you're doing in your study. Once you cleared all of those hurdles, you've cleared peer review, you're ready to publish and it gets published. That's a primary source. That's a research team telling the world, here's what we found. That's the kind of thing you want to find and use in APA, which is why typically professors will say, please use scholarly sources. Make sure it comes from the database, because scholarly sources are generally, they don't always have to be, but generally they're primary sources. They're authors talking about their own research. Secondary sources are discussions of others' research. And so you can think about it this way at the bottom. If you imagine Smith conducts research and published his findings, you know, so he did the research, published his findings, went through the whole process. Smith's publication is a primary source. He determined why it is that multitasking is dangerous for learning in his study, and he's sharing that with us. If we read another author that cites Smith, that's now a secondary source. It's kind of 1 degree away from Smith. And so one of the reasons you often hear not to use Wikipedia is what Wikipedia is beyond usually plagiarism. It takes those primary sources and just kind of embeds them. So it's better just to go to the actual document. Go to the bottom of the Wikipedia page, look at the link, go to the actual source and look at that. That might be closer to a primary source. So in APA, you really want to focus on primary sources, which just is another way of saying scholarly sources. If you go to a website, they could be primary sources too, depending on what it is, but it's a little bit trickier to find. If you go into ProQuest and just click scholarly sources, you know, you're going to be able to find them very quickly. Any questions so far? Okay. I want to show you a couple APA resources before we jump into citations and how to kind of put them together. One is the APA style website. I mean, talk about a primary source, right? So I'm just going to click on this and then I'll share the tab. So bear with me a second here. It's the only tricky thing is switching tabs here when you're doing this. Okay, can everyone see the APA style screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So this is a great resource. If you were, oh, thank you. If you're doing research and you're looking for sample papers, sample citations, like how to actually put them together, which we're going to talk about in a second, this is a great resource, the APA style website. Of course, primary source, go right to the APA. You're going to get good information. So some cool things that they have here. You can see reference examples. If you click on that, for example, it'll bring up a whole bunch of things. How do you cite a journal article, a newspaper article? You can kind of see all of that there. If you go back here, you can also see how to set up a title page. If you click that, we're going to look at that in a second anyway, so don't worry. But it's here too. You can see it. It's annotated, tells you what to put and where to put it. So it's really nice. So this is a great resource, the APA style website. I'm going to go back to our slideshow. Another one, I'm not going to click on it just because the switching tabs is kind of tedious, but another one is called Purdue OWL. So can everyone see that PowerPoint again? Just to make sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, Purdue OWL is another great resource. It's online. It's free, just like APA style. That might be more of a secondary source because it's Purdue OWL taking APA and creating their own style guide. Wherever you get it, it's going to be APA. That's the thing to remember. It's not different versions. It's APA is APA. So wherever you get your information, we're going to talk about that later too, with some other tools that you can find for citation. As long as it's correct and it's APA, you're good to go. I prefer personally the APA style website and Purdue OWL, but there are tons of resources out there. I mean, if you just Google them, you'll see, but those two are going to give you pretty much everything that you need. And they're free, they're open, they're used by everybody, so they're good sources. Some other things to keep in mind, if you're in EBSCO or you're in ProQuest or any of those databases, they have built-in citation generators. Those can be really helpful. Again, you have to double check them, kind of make sure that they're correct, but they're going to get you 90% of the way. Maybe something is capitalized that shouldn't be or whatever, that can happen, but they're usually pretty close. They're pretty good. Noodle Tools and EasyBib, we'll talk about Noodle Tools later, but those can be good sources as well. And then if you like printed versions, the APA style manual is of course available in print. Just make sure you get the 7th edition, which is the latest edition, because there are some changes that have happened. Okay, so here are the basics of APA. So if somebody, like let's say you're in a class and the professor says the paper has to be APA, these are the things the professor's looking for. First, a title page, and I'm going to show you examples of all these things as we go. So you're going to see what it looks like, each of these things, what they look like. So they require a title page. That's a difference. MLA doesn't, APA does. They also require some type of running header, which you're going to see, an abstract, and there's a slide for each of these that'll go into detail. APA style headings and subheadings, levels of headings in your paper. In-text citations, and a reference page. Remember that in-text citations and reference pages kind of work together. They're symbiotic. So if I see Smith 2020 page 17, that tells me to go to the reference page, find an entry that begins with Smith, and that's the connection. Then I get all the publication information, the bibliographic information for that source. I want to note something at the bottom. This is important, and this might come up in a class that you're in. APA 7, the latest one, specifies slightly different requirements for student and professional papers. That's kind of a new thing. It used to be APA was APA for the most part, but now there's kind of professional paper guidelines and student paper guidelines. And so I'm going to note some of those differences. You might be in a situation where a professor is kind of expecting some of the professional guidelines to be followed, and I will note that as we go. So it's not a big deal, but there are some slight differences that you'll see examples of. So first, let's talk about a title page. And then I have an example I'm going to show you. Your title page is going to be on its own page, and it'll have these elements. The first thing is you want to have a page number in the upper right-hand corner. So to do that in Microsoft Word, you can you just hit Insert and then Page Number, and it pops right up for you. You tell it upper right-hand corner. Then you want to hit Enter about 6 times to go down about to the top third of the page. And you put the title of your paper, which should be centered, bolded, and placed in that part. Then you want your name, the name of the institution that you're affiliated with. So where you're a student, Niagara University, in this case. The course title, the course for which the paper was written, obviously. The professor's name of that course, and then the date of the submission. So I'm going to show you an example of what this looks like. Okay, can everyone see the Word document?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So this is what an APA style page is going to look like, title page. And I want to point out a few things. I don't know what this is. It's blocking some of my screen here. But these two things that are highlighted, this short version of the title in all caps and the author's note at the bottom, those are for professional papers, like a conference paper, something that you might be presenting somewhere. Then you would include the author note, and then you include this running header, which is just the title, the first part of the title, shortened version, in all capital letters. And as you know, in Microsoft Word, whatever you put up here in the header is going to be on every single page of the document automatically in the same format. I only include them here, not to confuse everyone, but some professors are going to expect an author note and the running header, even though it's not technically required for a student paper. So that might be something you might ask your professor. If you put it, you're not going to get dinged for putting it. No one's going to say, why do you have that there? But just be aware that some professors are going to expect that because it used to be the norm in APA. And it is still the norm in scholarly professional journals and so forth. But the things that should be there, you have your title here in bold. And so I just said APA title pages, how to format student papers using APA 7. Then you would put your name. And then these are all centered too, so you'd use the center function. The institution, the course that you're submitting the paper for, so I just use one that I teach here. The professor who teaches that course, I just made someone up. And then the date of submission. And so the good thing is you don't have to memorize all this. You can go to APA style the web page, and they have an example that you can refer to that's this exact format, just different language, just different names. But you don't have to remember any of this stuff. That's what I always tell students. The style guides are there. You just basically are filling in blanks. What's your title, what's your name, what's your university, and so you can get this stuff at either of those sources. But this is what it would look like. And then there'd be no author note typically on a student paper, and that'd be the first page. So that is the title page. Any questions so far? You're going to see with APA, there's just a lot of things. So you want the mistakes that people make. So I'll tell you some mistakes that I see people make. One, on the title page, it's not centered. That's a mistake. You want to make sure you center it. Another is sometimes people forget to put all of the required pieces, like the name of the institution, the course title, the date, the professor's name, in that order too. It's kind of nitpicky. But again, you're just filling in blanks. So if you're looking at a style guide, just make sure you're filling in all of the pieces of information that it asks for. So there's, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 elements there. Make sure all 6 elements make it into that title page. Okay. The next thing is the running header, which we just looked at. In student papers, the running header is just the page number in the upper right-hand corner. And running means it's on every page. That's all that means. Header is just what's at the top of each page in your document. In professional papers, as I mentioned, what you would do is you'd shorten your title. You'd put it in all capitals like we just saw a minute ago, and it would be in the upper left-hand part of the header, and that would be on every page. Again, some professors are going to expect that, so just kind of be aware that that could be the case, but that's for professional papers typically. Those are really the main distinctions. Everything else going forward is pretty much going to be the same in a student paper versus a professional paper. Why did they make that change? I'm not sure, to be honest. I didn't get an email. I don't know. But yeah, so they were always making changes to MLA and APA. And so I think it was to simplify matters for students, honestly, is the reason why. Okay, so the next element, we've got our title page. We formatted it. We're off to the races. The next page is an abstract. Most professors expect an abstract, although some don't. It depends. It'll probably be mentioned in the assignment. Not every APA paper necessarily has to have an abstract, but I'd say most of them do. And most professors who want an APA paper want an abstract. So an abstract is going to be the next page after the title page. It's on its own page, and it's like a paragraph in length at the top of the page. We're going to see an example in a second. It's just a brief summary. It's the who, what, when, where, why, and how type of deal. What's your topic? What were your research questions? How, what is your thesis? What are some of the main kind of findings, takeaways? And that's about it. At the bottom, and you're going to see this example, like I said in a second, often you want to include some keywords. In other words, what are the topics of your paper? So if you're doing something on multitasking and learning, let's say, how does multitasking affect learning? Your keywords might be multitasking, learning, distraction, something like that. Think of like if somebody were searching for your article in a database, what keywords would they search that would bring your article up? And so I'll show you an example. I'm going to have to switch the screen share here. Okay. Can everyone see this Purdue OWL page?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. I don't know why I think this is in Latin. I'm not sure why. They must have just done that. For Purdue OWL, they kind of have a sense of humor, so you'll see. But the abstract is basically on its own page. Again, what you see up here is the running header. This is the title, okay, so of the paper. Again, not required in student papers anymore, but if you put it, you're safe. And I would always think, personally, I would put it anyway, even though it's not required, because most professors are used to seeing it. If they don't see it, they're going to think something's wrong. Not everyone, but a lot of people. I've seen that happen. So then you have abstract, the word abstract. Then you have, as you can see, it's short. Obviously, I think that's Latin. I don't even know. I'm guessing it looks like it is. But so you have a short abstract. Doesn't have to be in Latin, by the way, so don't worry. You can write it in English. You should. And down here, keywords are in italics, and then you have a couple keywords, things that are mentioned many times in your paper. And so that's on its own page as page 2. So we got the title page, and so Purdue OWL has their own, you can see, like this. That's why these are great resources. You don't have to remember all the stuff. They're there. You can always pull them up and kind of refer back and forth to them. So that's the abstract. Any questions so far on abstracts or title pages?
No.
Oh, did someone just say no? Okay.
Correct.
I
No
didn't,
questions.
okay. Yeah, no, I didn't know if somebody was trying to ask something and it just got cut off. Actually, I can see the chat. I didn't realize that. Okay, so you can also put your questions in the chat. I just realized I can see them even though I turned the video pane off. So feel free to type your questions in the chat too, and I will see them. Okay, so back to the next thing, APA style headings. Here's a difference between APA and a lot of other styles. APA will often have, you have your paper title, of course. And in a lot of instances, like in MLA, you title your paper and you just type away for 7, 8 pages or whatever, and you might not have any other titles in your paper or headings. APA is very different. A lot of times in APA, you end up breaking your paper into sections. It might be kind of findings, results, conclusion, that kind of thing. And I'm going to show you quickly just kind of what that would look like, but APA has a certain way they call level 1, meaning your title or a major part of the paper. Level 2, level 3, level 4 are kind of like, if you can think about it, let's say you have let's say you're studying, since I mentioned it before, the effect of multitasking on learning. Maybe you have a section that says, what is multitasking? And then maybe you have another heading that's types of multitasking. And then maybe you have electronic multitasking. That kind of gets more specific as you go. That's what we mean by level 1. Level 2 is a little more specific. Level 3 is a little bit more specific within that topic. When that happens, there's a certain way that you go about formatting those. And that's a common thing in APA. So I'm going to click this and I'll show you. This is from the APA style website. And yep, this is what it looks like. So you have the title of your paper, like we mentioned, that on the first page. So this is, you've got your title page, you've got your abstract. This is the first page of actual text. It would be page 3 typically, because it'd be the third page of the paper. You'd have your title here, just like you normally would, and then you'd start writing. And then when you start breaking it up into sections, like, so maybe you have, if you're talking about a study, maybe you have research question, then maybe you have participants, then maybe you have procedure and results, and those are kind of like major sections. The way you would do that is all listed here. So again, you don't have to memorize all this. That's the great thing. So not only do they show you an example, they also have an explanation. So a level 2 heading would be kind of major section of the paper. Then if you have, it's kind of like turning your outline into a paper. When you make an outline, you kind of have A, B, C, D, and then, or 1, and Roman numeral 1, then big letter A, and then so on. So it's kind of like that, just making it into the paper. So level 2 heading would be this. If you had something within that one, you wanted to break it up into a couple topics, then you would center them again, and so on. You can kind of see. So this is a document I would pay attention to if you're writing, let's say, like a literature review, where you have maybe the different sources and you want to break it up into categories. You can categorize each one of them and put them in level 2 headings. So this is something that I would refer to as you're writing your papers, especially if you have a topic that you're breaking up into a lot of pieces. Like if you're doing a study and you have the research problem, then you have the participants, and then within participants, maybe you have demographics, maybe you have geography, maybe you have socioeconomic. However, when you break it down, of course, you always have to ask yourself, is a heading justified? If you only have 3 sentences, you probably don't need a heading there. So it's one of those kind of things. How much do you want to break it down? How much detail you want to get into? Okay, but just be aware of the headings. The other thing is in-text citations. So this is a big one. Every style is going to have in-text citations. In APA, it's going to contain 3 elements, typically: the author, the year, and the page number. And so in this example here, this is just the author and year, because one way you can do it is to give a general finding. For example, if you're referencing somebody's major major conclusions in research, then there's no page number because the whole thing, the whole article would be those general conclusions. There's no particular page number you can point to. In that case, you do it like this. Say something like Smith 2020. This is how you do it in APA. You put the year next to the author like that in a signal phrase. Smith 2020 found that most students reported getting far fewer than the recommended number of hours of sleep per night. Okay, general finding. If you have a specific quote though, a quote is always going to need a page number. So that's something to keep in mind. One thing that professors always sort of complain about is, people who quote, but then don't put a page number, don't have a citation, because a quote obviously has to come from a page number, right? It came from a particular place in the article. So recent studies confirm this hypothesis. Then we have our quote. In our year-long study of college students who resided on campus, 75% routinely slept less than 7 hours per night. End quote. And then you've got your citation, author, comma, year, comma, page number with a little p, and then the number. Keep in mind also the period goes after the citation. It's part of the sentence. So I'll often see where there's a period in here and a period out here, or just one in here. Remember, one period per sentence, and it always goes after the citation. So in-text citations, just be careful. Make sure you put the year, the page number, they're separated by commas. If there's more than one author, Smith and Thomas. Eventually you get to enough authors, and this is in the style guide on all those pages that you can look at, then you would use et al, meaning and others. I think it's 6 or more in APA, but that's uncommon, but it does come up sometimes. So questions at all so far? Oh, it's 5:40 already. Time flies when you're talking about APA. All right, reference pages. The reference pages, I'm not going to actually show this one because just for time, we'll be here till 9 o'clock at this point if I go to all these. But if you go to the style guides, one of the things that you're going to see are sample reference pages. And in a little bit, Melissa's going to show us some great ways to format our entries for reference pages. The key things for a reference page is just to make sure it's alphabetized. That's one thing I see often. People forget to alphabetize it by the author's last name. So just put all your sources in and then alphabetize them right at the end. That's the easiest way to do it. Or if you use a source like she's going to show you, it's going to help you do that anyway. They should be double spaced. They should be indented on lines 2, 3, 4. That's what 2+ means. So it's like the opposite of a paragraph. A paragraph, you indent line 1. A citation, you indent lines 2, 3, 4, not line 1. That way it's like the headings in a sense, right? Everything that goes with it gets indented. And don't forget the little details. If you're constructing a citation, a lot of times there's the period has to go here. This has to be in italics. Pay attention to all those little things because they do matter. It might seem nitpicky, and it is a little bit, I guess, but it is a scholarly endeavor. And there's a certain format that's expected. So just be careful of all those little details and make sure you're following the little nuances. Make sure colons are where they belong, commas, that kind of thing in the style guides. Okay, any questions so far? All right. So part 2, how do we actually use this? What can we do with our sources? Number 1, I would say get accustomed to using signal phrases if you're not already. This is a great thing. I would say and having read tens of thousands of papers, I bet, over the last 15, 20 years I've been doing this, the one thing that I notice the most in terms of mistakes with using research is when a writer will use a quote and let that serve as an entire sentence. There's a couple reasons you don't want to do that. One, you're not getting as much mileage out of the quote as you could if you do that. In other words, you're not telling us who said it, who that person is, or putting it in some kind of context. Number 2, if you're using a quote as your whole sentence, if you think about a paragraph, you're talking, now all of a sudden someone else is talking, and there was no introduction. It's a jarring shift that can throw your reader off. And so a signal phrase tells the reader that, hey, something's coming. A quote, statistic, just a paraphrase, something from a source. And so in APA, in order to do this, what you're looking at is what's in purple here. You have the author's name, you have the year in parentheses, and you have a verb phrase. Now, here's the weird thing in APA, it's usually past tense. So usually we write about writing in present tense. So I usually use MLA because I'm in English. I work in the humanities and in English all the time with literature and writing, and typically you write in the present tense. APA prefers past tense, just a weird quirk. So in this case, it would be Thomas illustrated the difficulty in tracking down these witnesses. And then I'd have my quote, and then I have my page number. I don't need Thomas in 2019 in here because it's over here. So it's just redundant to put it in the in-text citation. The key thing is try not to say wrote or says or, well, said or stated. Try to use active verbs, illustrated, explained, disagreed, right? If you want to say, if you're saying something and then Thomas disagreed with this assertion, and then you put a quote. So a good thing to do is to Google when you're writing something like APA signal phrases, and you'll get a bunch of verbs that you can use. Because if you can't think of anything, if it's 2 in the morning and you're writing, we've all been there probably, and you need a little kind of inspiration, that's a good thing to do, because then at least you can look at a list. Oh, I could use that. Emphasizes, that's a good one. I'll use that. Instead of just Thomas wrote, Thomas stated, Thomas wrote, it becomes very sort of repetitive and also not as clear. You're not getting as much use out of it or getting as much benefit from it. So signal phrases, definitely use signal phrases. They're good to use in MLA or APA or any style, but that's the big thing, is make sure the year is next to the name. The other thing is when you're structuring your argument, think of it this way. Make a claim, provide evidence, that's from your sources, and then explain. This is probably the second biggest mistake I see people making all the time, especially in APA, where you've done so much research. It just becomes kind of like a crazy quilt of here's a quote, here's a quote, here's a quote, and tacked together with a couple sentences. And then I turn it in and the professor says, nope, there's no argument here. And so, but I did all this research. And so what you want to get in the habit of doing is making sure the balance of your paper is your explanation, the so what. Because again, the question is, what are you adding to the discussion? Okay, Thomas or Smith or Davis or whoever says what they say, but then why are you citing them, and what is it that you're going to say about their work that makes this paper need to be in existence? So why are we reading your paper? You always want to think, what is my goal? Who is my audience? What is my purpose? And so in this case, if I'm trying to explain something, let's just say about multitasking and learning, well, I have a certain thesis and I'm using that study to back up my thesis, but I'm the one making the case. You're a lawyer in a courtroom, you're the prosecutor or you're the defense attorney. You have a thesis and you have evidence and you're explaining it. The thing a lot of people do is they make a claim, they provide evidence, and then you just move on without explaining it. That's like a lawyer, a prosecutor saying, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the defendant left work between 1 and 3 o'clock p.m. The end. And the jury might say, is that when the crime took place? Why are you giving me that? Explain, say, connect those dots. That's the important thing. So I'll show you what it looks like. I'm a big fruit tree fan, so anyone here from my CRL classes are probably like, fruit trees again, my goodness. So first thing is to make a claim, and that's part of your thesis. So it might look like this. Heirloom fruit trees carry crucial genetic resistance to disease and pests. Notice crucial, that's a value judgment word, right? Saying today is Wednesday is not a thesis. Saying Wednesday is the best day of the week is a thesis. It's arguable, right? It's something that you could try to demonstrate with the why. So a thesis, a claim always has to be testable. It has to be provable. Just saying my favorite color is purple, well, it either is or isn't, or the best color is purple. That's too subjective. There's no way to prove that to someone who didn't agree and said, no, I think green's the best, right? So a thesis has to be provable. A claim has to be provable. You have to be able to illustrate via evidence. So the word crucial is something I could possibly illustrate. The next thing is you want to provide evidence. So I've got my previous sentence, heirloom fruit trees carry crucial genetic resistance to diseases and pests. Okay, give me some evidence. Smith 2020 explains that heirloom varieties were originally selected by our ancestors primarily because of their resistance or even immunity to many common apple pests and diseases. Piece of evidence from Smith. Not a page number or a quote, it's just his general finding that I'm mentioning here. And so therefore there's no page number to put. So I have evidence. Now I need to explain the so what. So what does that mean? Connect the dots. The explanation's in purple. Everything else is the same that we're just adding to it. One major benefit of disease resistance is that it greatly reduces or even eliminates the need for pesticides, fungicides, or other potentially dangerous chemicals, making organic growing a viable option. And I could continue. I'm not going to go through a whole paper here, but you could imagine where that gives the writer somewhere to go with this. If you've ever been in a situation where you're writing and writing, and then it's like, I don't know what to say next. You've probably been in that spot before. We all have. Well, sometimes you want to think, well, what's the next claim I can make? What's the next piece of evidence? Because it gives you a road to go down. I could talk about organic growing if I want for 5-6 more sentences. If it's not that important, I wouldn't maybe, but it gives you as a writer somewhere to go that is not just already in Smith. We're using Smith, but we're going a step further than Smith. Okay, so that's the important thing, is you always want to use your evidence and then make sure your explanation is the balance of the paragraph. Questions? Okay. The other thing, and this is kind of what I said before, make subclaims as well, but I'm going to skip through that. That just basically means you can continue to make claims. Did someone unmute? I thought I heard someone about, no? Okay. Here's another tip. I always like to say this in my classes. I teach a lot of writing classes, but read like a writer and write like a reader. What I mean by that is when you're reading, so you go to ProQuest, you get a scholarly journal in APA format, you have to write this paper, you have to figure out what are you going to use in your paper. Some things you want to look for is, well, you know what a writer does. As a writer, you do certain things. You have a thesis, you have an argument, right? You have evidence, you have claims, explanations. So when you're reading and you have your highlighter in your hand, those are the things you want to look for. What is the thesis? Can I highlight it? What are the claims? If I see a claim, maybe I highlight it in green. If you're a visual learner and you like colors, I like colors. So maybe you could make claims green, evidence blue, explanation yellow, or whatever. By doing that, it allows you to really analyze the argument. When you go to write your paper, it's easy to know, okay, what do I want to cite? I probably want to cite evidence more than claims. I want to cite evidence or explanation from the source because that's going to give me something I can use in my paper. Because there's nothing worse than when you have this stack of journal articles and you're not sure what to use. Well, these are the things to look for. What are the pieces of evidence? Are there any statistics, for example? Numbers, quotes. Are there graphs and charts? Graphs and charts cost money to put in, especially if it's like a textbook or something like that. But journals, they take up valuable real estate. So if they're there, there's a very good reason they're there. And it's not just to fill space. So if you see one, you know, hey, that's something I really should zero in on. Here's a little tip. A lot of people just skip and don't even read charts and graphs when they see them in a scholarly journal. They just go right past them like they're not even there. And that's a mistake because that's where you're going to get a lot of really good information. It's a visual representation of what you're reading and could be useful to your paper. Also look for level 2, 3, 4 headings. Read like a writer, right? Writers know that, as writers, we know we have these level 2, 3, 4 headings for a certain purpose. Well, so if I'm reading and I see it, that helps me understand the purpose of the writer as well. Because I know if the writer has a level 2 or 3 heading, then those are subtopics, and we can sort of see the structure of the article that we can pull apart and use later in our paper. So that will help. Quick review, just some do's and don'ts. Do use signal phrases, like we talked about. Google APA signal phrases, and they'll give you some examples. Don't use quotes too often. The number one mistake I mentioned is quotes being entire sentences. Probably 1B. The number 1B mistake is too many quotes or too long. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 line quotes. That's too much. You want to make sure that the balance is always your writing. So you make a claim, a sentence or two, provide evidence, 2, 3 sentences maybe, and then 5 or 6 explaining why that quote fits your thesis, why that evidence fits your thesis, connecting the dots. Rule of thumb, if you do that, if that's the general balance, then most of the paper is your work, your analysis, your explanation. The other big thing is you do want to reference general finding from your sources. That's true, but you don't want to copy summaries or abstracts verbatim. So in other words, if you have an annotated bib assignment, don't go to ProQuest, and I've seen this, that's why I mention it, and copy the abstract into an annotated bib. It's not going to work. It's not suited for that, first of all, but it also is not what an annotated bib is, and we'll just briefly touch on that later. All right, any questions on the first couple sections? These aren't as long. I just want to give you a few notes here because we've already gone quite a while. It's already 5:54. So don't worry, we won't keep you here till 8 or 9 or anything. Annotated bibs. If you've ever had to do an annotated bib, or if you have to do one soon, by the way, that's something I can help you with. We can make an appointment on Zoom, and I'd be happy to sit down and work with you on that. Annotated bibs are kind of fun. I've always liked writing them, but then again, I'm a little strange that way maybe. But annotated bibs are sort of interesting because they're your chance to weigh in on the research, and they help you as a reader and a writer because they force you to focus on what matters, what's important. A typical annotated bib consists of the citation, that's the bibliography portion. The word annotated just means explanations or notes. And so it's a bibliography, list of sources, with a summary and a rationale for each source. And depending on your professor and your assignment, it might be one paragraph underneath each source that is a summary and rationale. Summary is who, what, when, where, why, how, what's the article. Rationale, how is it useful in your research? Some professors want a little bit more, it just depends. But that's the general idea. You're going to have a summary and then some sort of rationale of why this source will be useful in your research. Like why are you looking at it, basically? Why are you reading it? Here's the key thing. Imagine you go to a movie, back when we could do that, although I think movie theaters are open, but now we're in Orange, so who knows. But if you go to a movie or go to an event with a bunch of people, and then everyone sort of talks about it afterward, everyone's takeaway or a memory of the event's a little different, right? Everyone's summary is a little different, even though they were in the same place watching the same thing. That's also true in an annotated bib, and so that's something to keep in mind, that an annotated bib, when you're looking at the who, what, when, where, why, and how, the who wrote it, who they are, that's not going to be different. But why it's important, that part's going to be different. What are the major takeaways? That part might be different. And so that's why you can put your name at the top, right? Because it's your work. Remember that. An annotated bib is not just a copy-paste from EBSCO or ProQuest. And that's the worst thing you can do. Again, it's not really suited to the assignment anyway. But when you're doing an annotated bib, it's, who are the authors? What were their findings? How is this research relevant to your research question? And so it's personalized in that way because your research question might be different from somebody else's. As I already mentioned this, so I'm kind of going to fast forward to this slide, but tips for effective summaries: remember the who, what, when, where, why, and how. Who are the authors? Who's the intended audience of the piece you're reading? That's important. What is the purpose? Are they trying to explain, persuade, entertain, whatever it might be, inform? When was it written? When was the research done? That's important too. You might find, for example, something published in 2020 that references numbers from 2018. And that's because it takes a long time for the peer review process to be completed. You know, it doesn't happen overnight. And so it's one of those things where something published in 2020, the best, most current data and numbers might be from 2 years ago, because what's being worked on now will be published in 2022. Not always, but it's just something to keep in mind that that's a possibility. Why was the text written? How was it written? Those are things to think about that you can use in your annotated bib when you're giving the research or giving the summary of the research. Okay. And we talked about that already, basically. Any questions so far in anything that we've talked about? Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Melissa, who's going to talk a bit about a handy citation or research tool called Noodle Tools.
Okay, so has anyone heard of Noodle Tools in the past? I mean, have you used it in high school or?
No, I haven't.
Anyone else?
I have. I've used it a couple times for a like English project that we're working on with our like library.
Oh, good. Okay. So basically what it is our subscription citation generator. And the only reason why I mentioned that we pay money for it through a subscription is because it does make it better than those that are freely available online, such as EasyBib or Son of a Citation Machine. You know, there's tons of them. But the caveat is that it's only as good as you are in identifying the information that is needed to go into the citation generator. Okay, so let me show you. You don't have to pull this up on your screen. Just please know that it's through the library homepage. So you have to go to library.niagara.edu, so make note of that. And it's on our homepage, actually. If you scroll down, it's under Quick Links, and it's the third link down, Noodle Tools. It does a lot more than what I'm going to show you in the next few minutes. Basically, you have to create an account. Just go to register. I just logged in, as you would any of our databases from off campus with your Maya, and you log in. But basically, it's a citation generator. But you can create your annotated bibliography right in here. You can make notes. You can have note cards, index cards, things like that. It's really cool to help plan your entire paper if you have lots of sources. Right now, I'm going to show you my sample bibliography just because I keep adding to this, not the ones that I actually use for research. I don't want to mess those up. So I'm going to click on this to begin. You would, let me just show you, click on New Project. In the upper left-hand corner of every page is where you will find the green New Project button or New Citation or things like that. Please know that you can share your research folders with other students who have a Noodle Tools account. So if you have a group project to do and everyone has to add 5 sources, then you don't have to wait for them to do it. It's cloud-based. You'll see it when they're there. When you go to add yours, it's all good. So that's where you would do it under this right here, sharing and collaboration. This is if you were required to share it with a course or your professor, or this is another student. Oh, my apologies for my dog. You can also add to-do list items so that hold on one second here. There we go. To-do list items to keep everyone in your group on track. Very useful to keep yourself on track too if you're not doing a group, but very crucial to be communicating with others in your group, especially when everyone's at a distance, right? I don't really use the research question or the thesis part unless I'm working with others, either the professor or other students, but that's up to you. The tab you really want to focus on is sources at the very top. Here's a list of all of my sources in alphabetical order that I will use for this project. Now, not for nothing, it keeps the citations, yes, but it also keeps the links to your research. So for example, I could just click on this next time I open it, and I want to use this quantitative research from Statista database. So I find this really helpful to keep all of my research and citations for each project I'm working on in this online space. If you want to print them out and highlight, that's up to you too, but please know that when you're here, you could also do options edit, and each citation will have this space for an annotation, and you can take your notes or write your original thinking of how you're going to use this information or the best parts of it. Even if you are very brief, and after you kind of look at the abstract, kind of look through the discussion a little bit of the research, maybe part of the introduction, you just jot down why you went to cite it. Because if you were going to go so far as to cite your source, you probably liked it. So just write that thinking here. It will help you to avoid plagiarism, but also just to remind you next time you go to use this information, why did you select it? Very, very helpful, I have found over the years. Okay, so let me just save this, and I'm going to show you quickly. When you go to new source, more often than not, you're going to select database. Yes, this is a lot. This is the advanced version, but I never know when I'm creating my new project and I haven't found any sources yet, what I'm going to find. So I like every option available, and they do give you the opportunity to cite over 70 different citation formats. To break it down for you, this first column on the left is the traditional research sources that you would use, especially in the blue here. In the middle, these are multimedia. And in the end, the last one to the right column, these are laws, okay, which are a pain to cite, so very useful that those exist. So more often than not, you're going to use a database. I'm going to select journal by default. And this is where you could find issues with Noodle tools. Now, I've heard professors tell me that a student will say, yes, they're fine because Noodle tools did it. No, that's not true because they come out a mess if you don't know what you're putting in. Okay, so the DOI, what is it even? What are you looking for? This could be troublesome if you don't know what you're looking at. But if you look at, when you click on each box, there's always in the upper right-hand corner of the box, a little I for more information. And it will give you directions on how to cite in APA, as well as an example. So that's what it should look like. So then you go back to your source, and you're like, does this one have a DOI? Oh, it does. There it is. That's what it looks like. So you would copy, and you would put it into Noodle Tools. And then it gives you suggestions. There's a warning. So very, very useful. So you have to make those changes to make it correct. Oh, so there's usually an S. That is true. I've never seen it without an S, so that would be wrong. And then the URL. If you have a DOI, you do not need a URL, and it will tell you that. So a lot of times, this is what the issue is. Now, this is time for you to talk with me a little bit here. When you're looking at a source in a database, such as the one that I just pulled up here, A Librarian in Rowling's Harry Potter series, there are different names or synonyms for what this could be, the name of the journal. So oftentimes students cite this incorrectly because it doesn't state it this way. So let's see in this example what Gail does here. What is the title of journal in this example? Can anyone tell me based on this screen? Does it say title of journal? From what you can tell with the citation information at the top.
Do you mean like where it says the librarian is, or no?
This is the article title. But in that area, yes, absolutely. Can you tell me what the title of the journal is? It's not explicit. It doesn't say it the way Noodle Tool says it. This is why it becomes troublesome, this area. What is the title of the journal called?
So when you think of journal titles, it's like, if you can imagine, if it's in like a periodical, what would be the magazine or periodical that article comes from?
Is it where it says like the comparative literature?
Yes, absolutely. But it's actually called this. So CLC Web, Comparative Literature. You need that whole thing. That is the title of the journal. But because it didn't say it was a little tricky, it just says from. Now, another synonym that someone could use, I've seen source, publication title. So it's different things. And because it wasn't explicit, you didn't, like this one's explicit. It says DOI. And we saw the example, it looked like it. This is where people get tripped up. Sometimes people do put the article title in the title of journal, but hopefully not, because it was above and we would have already done that. So that's where if you put the wrong thing in, well, then it would be wrong. So it is helpful to learn to identify what you're supposed to be looking at in APA and like where that would be in a book, where that is in a journal citation. And I am here, any librarian is here. Professor Pratt in the Writing Center is also there to help you to identify these things so that you can use these tools confidently. Okay. So it's only as good as you are. So as long as you have those things and you know exactly, you know, like what you're supposed to be putting in there, then it's easy and it's going to help. Any questions on that? The last thing I'm going to show you, I'm just going to cancel this right here, is how do you take this information? You are done with your citations and you want to add this to the paper that you were working on, your draft. How do you get them out of here? Very good question. We were here, we've used it numerous times. We'll say, for example, new source in the upper left-hand corner in green. If you look to the right of it, the last thing here is print, export to, Word document, Google Docs, HTML, whatever. You'll probably use Word, but you could use Google Docs as well. Oh, I thought I was logged in. One moment, please. There we go. After you click that, your reference page shows up. So all you have to do is copy what they give you and put it into your last blank page of the paper that you were working on before you submit it to your professor. Okay. One last thing I wanted to show you, when this was a pre-formatted citation, but when you're looking at this, this is when you're in the databases and they give you the citation that's, you know, basically done. They're not 100% accurate, especially there's no date here in the newspaper article. Oh, I would double check that one because that looks shady. Okay. What you want to do though, in the upper right-hand corner of any of these citations is it tells you what it should look like. And so you have to make that change. Oh, and it should be after the author, the date. So that's kind of a mess. And then, oh, I did the MLA here because there's no quotes in APA. Clearly, I was in the middle of teaching and lost my mind. But you just have to make those changes. They're not that bad. But say you did the same thing. Just make the changes. You can see them here. First letter of the article title is capitalized. The rest are not unless it's a proper noun. So I would get rid of these. And I would do that. You see how this is going, right? So you just make those changes because you know exactly what it should be. Okay, so as long as you do that site reference page, you can guarantee that this is correct. Okay, any questions on Noodle Tools at the moment? That was just a brief introduction. It does so much more, as I was saying. If you have any questions about it, you can go to the library, Niagara U Library's YouTube channel, and there is a video there to help you set up an account and use it. You can always make a research appointment with a librarian. We're here for you. Just because we're at a distance now doesn't mean we have stopped our services. We are here for you up until like December 22nd or something like that. So you just let us know.